Welcome to our program on Kardec Radio.
Hello, dear friends, and welcome to our new program. This is the premiere for our new program, which we entitled Miracles According to Spiritism. And we're basing our study on Genesis. Genesis is composed of several parts. Part one really deals with the genesis of the planet, of the universe. Part two deals with the miracles. And in part two, chapter 13, which is really the first chapter because Allan Kardec organized the Genesis book consecutively. So he didn't start each part with number one. So chapter 13 is entitled Characteristics of Miracles. So today we are going into the first part of part two of chapter 13, and that is entitled Miracles in the Theological Sense. Dear friends, this is exciting. Miracles is a subject where, first of all, we all feel we need miracles in our lives. And to engulf on this study, understanding what miracles really are, do they really exist? How can we explain them? Only Spiritism can give us a really deep insight, and we're deeply grateful to Allan Kardec, to the spirits on high, who've codified these beautiful, eye-opening, enriching, discerning teachings for us. And we're deeply grateful to Kardec Radio to have for the mentors and Dr. Vanessa Anzalone, who've created this beautiful platform for us where we can meet and exchange ideas and highlight sections and really go deeper in the studies. So let us begin. Again, we're basing our study on the book Genesis, part 2, and we're going to chapter 13 entitled Characteristics of Miracles. And within that, we are today talking about miracles in the theological sense. Dear friends, welcome for joining. Let me go over to the comment section. Beth Cruz, Nora Brazil, thank you so much, dear friends, for being here. It is always a pleasure. We wouldn't be here without you. So, okay, so if you want to read along, feel free. We're not going to go exactly 100% word by word, but we're going to lean on this chapter very heavily. So, part one. Etymologically, the word miracle comes from the Latin mirare, and mirare means to admire. So this is our first clue, that the word goes back to Latin, and it originally means to admire. And it also means admirable, something extraordinary, surprising. So this is what Allan Kardec is saying about it. We looked it up online, and in the Webster's Dictionary, in the Oxford Dictionary, it also says a miracle is that which causes wonder and astonishment. So we kind of understand that, because that's how we feel like when there is a miracle, we're astounded, we are surprised, we are filled with wonder. So then he continues to say, theology defines this word. So there's a distinction between the non-theological definition of this word and the theological. So the theology defines this word as an act of divine power contrary to the known laws of nature. So this is more like a specialty. Theology becomes even more narrow in their definition of miracles, because now it is an act of divine power. They're bringing God in, and it is according to theology, contrary to the known laws of nature. Now let us pause. What is the law of nature? In order to understand what law of nature is, let us go to the Spirit's book. And in part 3, the divine law question, the first question in the section divine law or natural law So there it is, the word natural law. Alan Kardec in question 614 is asking, what is meant by natural law? Now let us remember, here theology defined a divine power contrary to the natural law. So what is natural law? Natural law is the law of God. So theology is essentially saying that a miracle goes against the law of God. It is the only law that is truly necessary for human beings to be happy, Alan Kardec continues. Then he says that the God of law, natural law, is eternal and immutable. Why? Because God is eternal and immutable. And if it's God's law, they need to be having the same attributes as God. Then he says, all the laws of nature are divine because God is the author of all things. We can follow that. That makes sense. Now he distinguishes under the umbrella of the divine law. He says there's two arms. So here's the divine law, law of God. There's two arms. One is called the physical law, and the other arm is called the moral law. Now, the physical laws fall into the domain of what? Science. So under God's laws is the physical arm, physical laws, and they fall into the domain of science. We're very familiar with them. And then the other law is the moral law. The other arm is the moral law, and that is the rules of the life of the body and the soul. So one is science and one is really spirituality, spiritism, the rules of life in the body and the soul. So this is important for us to know that God's laws rule the universe. The eternal and immutable, just like God. And there's two aspects. There's the scientific, material aspect to God's laws, and there's the moral aspect. And when we study the God's laws in the Spirit's book, they're of course what? They're the moral laws. So now we understand the bigger picture, hopefully. Now back to what we're learning here about theology. Again, theology claims that miracle defines miracles as an act of divine power, but contrary to the known laws of nature. Interesting, right? So miracle, like so many others, has lost its original meaning. So the word miracle, like many words in our language, have lost their original meaning because the original meaning was what? To admire, admirable. But now all of a sudden theology defines it much more narrow. From having a more generalized meaning, it has become restricted to a particular order of phenomena. In the thinking of the masses, a miracle implies the idea of a supernatural event. We're kind of familiar with that, right? Supernatural. Miracle is supernatural. In the theological sense, it is a derogation from the laws of nature. So in other words, it goes contrary to the law of nature in theology, through which God manifests the divine power. So again, the law of nature defines through the laws of nature, God manifests the divine power. But in theology, it goes against that. It goes against the law of nature, through which God manifests the divine power. This is actually its common acceptation, which has become its proper meaning. So theology has really captured the word miracle for all of us. And now we're thinking it's a supernatural event, and where the divine power takes over and creates something, but it goes against God's laws, law of nature. One of the characteristics of a miracle per se is that it is inexplicable for the very act that it occurs outside natural laws. Laws cannot explain it according to theology. This is so much the idea that has been attached to it, that if a miraculous event can be explained, it is no longer a miracle, no matter how surprising it may have been at first. So a miracle is only a miracle as long as it cannot be explained, if it doesn't fall under God's laws, under the law of nature. Only then, according to theology, is it a miracle. What gives credit to miracles in the eyes of the church is precisely their supernatural origin and the impossibility of explaining them. The church is so set on this point that any likening of miracles to the phenomena of nature is considered heresy, an attack against the faith. So we're getting a really clear picture here, right, friends? We're understanding that in theology, miracles are defined as an act of divine power contrary to the law of God. The minute this is being questioned and that a miracle is aligned or linked to the law of nature, then the church calls it heresy, because at that very moment, you're questioning the power of God. The church has excommunicated and even burned people at the stake for not having wanted to believe in certain miracles. Very interesting, isn't it? Another characteristic of the miracle is that it is unusual, isolated, and exceptional. Again, unusual, isolated, and exceptional. So what we have so far as a definition of a miracle, according to theology, is supernatural, unusual, exceptional, and isolated. And it is a derogation from the law of nature, from God's laws. The moment a phenomenon is reproduced, whether spontaneously or intentionally, it shows it is subject to a law. And henceforth, whether that law is known or not, it is no longer a miracle. So the minute a phenomenon can be reproduced, whether it's intentionally or not unintentionally, but right at that moment, when this event, this phenomena happens one more time, boom, boom, it's not a miracle anymore. It gets scratched out from the list of miracles. That is the definition. Number 2, science performs miracles every day in the eyes of the unlearned. If a man who was really dead were called back to life through divine intervention, it would be a true miracle because it is an event contrary to the laws of nature. We remember that the laws of nature have the scientific arm. So according to science, which falls under the law of nature, that would be a miracle because they wouldn't be able to explain it. However, if the man only appears to be dead, if there is still within him a vestige of latent vitality, and if science or a magnetic action manages to reanimate him, then to knowledgeable persons, it becomes a natural phenomenon, whereas in the eyes of unlearned folk, the event will still pass as miraculous. So we're actually introducing another element. So if this man is not really dead, in science, the doctors, due to their methods, their knowledge, can actually revive this person. To the learned people, to those who know more, this is not a miracle anymore, because now it falls under scientific laws, under law of nature. But for those of us who would know how to do that, how to revive this man again, who still has some vitality left, who's not really dead, and we look at it and we don't understand the mechanism behind it, we would say, wow, that's a miracle. So that the new element we're introducing is, with more knowledge, we may be able to more easily build a bridge to and explain a phenomenon through the natural law. And at that moment, it loses its status of miracle. So let us continue. If you have any questions, please, dear friends, join. Hi, Vanessa. It's so nice to see you too. Lovely to have you here. And Flavia and somebody from Kardec Radio. Wonderful. So let us continue. If in the midst of certain peasants, a physicist launches an electric kite and causes lightning to hit a tree, this new Prometheus will certainly be looked at as being armed with a diabolical power. However, Joshua stopping the movement of the sun, or rather the earth, if one accepts the event as factual, would be a true miracle. For there is no magnetizer endowed with power great enough to perform such a wonder. So the first case would be sort of explainable. But the second case would not, according to the general knowledge, it would be impossible to explain through natural law. Henceforth, it would be falling into a miracle. So at this point, Allan Kardec just gifted us with two examples for us to understand more. Again, the phenomena, the explanation that theology offers to us is as long as it cannot be explained by natural laws, by law of God, it is a miracle. The minute it can be explained, it loses its status of miracle. Now he says, centuries of ignorance were steeped in miracles. Because anything whose cause was unknown passed as supernatural. Makes sense, right? If it couldn't be explained, wow, it became supernatural because the mind couldn't make a reason, couldn't explain it. To the degree that science revealed new laws, the circle of the extraordinary tightened. So again, the element of the more we know, the more science developed, the more science was able to explain why certain things happened, leaning on the law of nature. And remember, we talked about the two arms. God's law of nature has two arms: science, scientific, material aspect, and the moral aspect. So the more science was able to explain these phenomena, the less miracles all of a sudden existed. But the more ignorant people were, the less science was developed, the more miracles existed because it couldn't be explained by people. Nevertheless, science had not yet explored the entire realm of nature, and consequently, there was still a large part of it left to the extraordinary. And we know that science is slowly developing. And even just several hundred years ago, a lot of things couldn't be explained that today can be explained. So less and less miracles existed. Number 3, having been expelled from the domain of materiality by science, the extraordinary took refuge in that of spirituality, which has been its last sanctuary. So now he's telling us that the more the phenomena could be explained by material laws, namely by science, what was left in extraordinary events, phenomena, was now felt under the umbrella of spirituality. That was the last sanctuary. That's where still miracles could be found. By demonstrating that the spirit element is one of the living forces of nature. This is a complicated sentence, but we'll breathe through it and then take it apart. So we're going to read it again. So bear with me. By demonstrating that the spirit element is one of the living forces of nature, a force incessantly acting concurrently with the material force, Spiritism brings the phenomena that result from its working back into the realms of natural effects, because like the others, they too are subject to the laws of nature. So what is Allan Kardec telling us here? Essentially, he's saying that spirit is a living force of nature. So the spirit is a living force of nature, and it's working side by side with the material forces. In other words, matter is inert. It takes spirit to enliven it. So spirit and matter work together. He says he expresses it side by side with the material forces. Spirit animates matter, because matter in itself is inert. It needs the spiritual element to become alive. Then he says, now Spiritism has come along, and Spiritism reunites the spirit phenomena or spiritual element with the realms of the natural effects. So in other words, the material elements. So Spiritism comes along and essentially explains the spiritual element and the material element, how they work together. And of course, both of them fall under the domain of the law of nature, God's laws. So we're already getting a little bit of an idea that miracles can be actually explained. So maybe there are no miracles in that sense of the definition, because there is a much bigger picture. Spiritism will give us so much more explanation as to how these phenomena exist. So in other words, when the extraordinary is expelled from spirituality, remember, the extraordinary after science came along was now pushed over to spirituality, to that domain. But when the extraordinary was expelled now from spirituality, it will have no more reason to exist. And only then will it be said that the time of miracles has passed. The moment we can explain the mechanisms behind the so-called miracles, then miracles won't exist anymore. The era of miracles will have passed. Now, there is a reference that Allan Kardec makes to chapter 1, item 18. And we're going to go there because the last part that we just explained, how matter and the material element and the spiritual element work together, which will be at the core of explaining how the mechanism of the so-called miracles works. He goes deeper in chapter 1, item 18. If you want to go there, it's on page 26, where he is saying, modern science demonstrated, observation by observation, that there is only one generating element for all the transformations of matter. What is that generating element? That is the universal cosmic fluid. Everything is a derivative, I can't think of the word. Everything stems from that, is made out of that, in different densities, forms, shapes. Some are ponderable, others imponderable, but everything is based on this generating element. André Louis also calls it the divine plasma. Allan Kardec usually calls it the universal cosmic fluid. However, matter per se is inert, and we know that. Once the spirit and the perispirit disconnect from our physical form at that very moment, this body is worth nothing. It just decomposes. There is no more life in it. It has so matter neither has life, thought, nor feeling. Matter on its own has no life, no thought, no feeling. It must be joined with the spiritual principle, the spiritual element, he said earlier. Spiritism neither discovered nor invented this principle, but it was the first to demonstrate it through irrefutable proofs. So Spiritism was the first to demonstrate this principle, this spiritual principle, that the fact that a spiritual principle has to be joined with the material principle for matter to be moving, to be alive, to be enlivened, to be vital, to be animalized. Spiritism studied it, analyzed it, and rendered its actions obvious. To the material element, Spiritism added the spiritual element. The material element and the spiritual element. These are the two principles, the two living forces of nature. So the two principles, living forces of nature, are the spiritual element and the material element. And the spiritual element enlivens the material element. Through the indissoluble union of these two elements, one can easily explain a multitude of phenomena and unexplainable till now. There, we're already getting an idea that combination is at the core of explaining miracles, how we can explain, how Spiritism helps us explain miracles. And of course, we know that the perispirit is the uniting body between matter and spirit. Molecule by molecule, we're connected to matter through the perispirit. Having the study of one of the two constituent elements of the universe as its object, namely the spiritual principle, because Spiritism is focused on the spiritual principle, right? Spiritism inevitably comes in contact with the majority of the sciences. It has to. Spiritism could not have appeared except after their development. So in order for Spiritism to come onto this planet, science had to have reached a certain level of development, because Spiritism needs science to explain certain phenomena, like those that were labeled miracles, for example. But at the same time, also, science needs Spiritism. They don't always have recognized it yet. But both Spiritism as well as science need to work together in order for mankind to ascend. The spiritual principle and the material principle, they have to work together. And we're reminded of God's laws, the laws of nature. They have two arms, the material, science, and the spiritual, the moral laws. So again, having the study of one of the two constituent elements, namely the spiritual principle of the universe as its object, Spiritism inevitably comes in contact with the majority of the sciences. Spiritism could not have appeared except after the development of the sciences. And through the force of things, it was born from the impossibility of everything being explained solely with the aid of the laws of matter. So the laws of matter, the laws of science are needed to explain the phenomena that Spiritism uncovers, the spiritual phenomena. So they work hand in hand together. So friends, let us see, there is one more section, perhaps where we could, excuse me, to go into the, no, let us not do that. We'll do that next time. I think this was a lot. Let us summarize what we talked about today, because this is just one tiny chapter. It's a little dense, but once we have understood the basics, how it all fits together, then we can go into the actual miracles and talk about them. And then we do it from a basis of knowledge, that we understand the foundation that's behind miracles. When we go into the miracles of the gospel and we see what Jesus did, and then we can use what we're learning now to explain what actually happened. So, in summary, today we talked about the definition that theology gives us of what miracles are. And we've learned that the definition is very narrow. Miracles are supernatural, they're unusual, they have to be isolated. The minute they get reproduced, they do not fall into the category of miracles anymore. They have to be exceptional. And they have to derogate from the law of nature. In other words, they cannot be explained. And the church was very stringent, very strict about them. The minute you would question what they would recognize as a miracle, you would be accused of heresy and even burned at the stake. Then we learned that due to the ignorance of the general population in previous centuries, more things fell into the category of miracles because science hadn't developed far enough yet. And so no explanations were available for certain phenomena. And then they would be called a miracle. But we also learned that, for example, when it came to saving lives, doctors who were more educated than the general public would know why a certain person was revived from looking almost dead. For them, that revival wasn't a miracle. But yet for others who didn't have the knowledge that they had, they would still call it a miracle. Then we learned that since miracles could not be explained by material science, by material laws, by law of nature that fall under the material arm, the domain of science that came along later, miracles were then pushed over towards spirituality and religion. So now miracles would fall into the domain of spirituality only. But then came along Spiritism, and Spiritism created a new link, a link between the spiritual element and the material element. And then because science was already much more developed and was able to help Spiritism to explain these spiritual phenomena, Spiritism could have only come at the time it came because science was already developed far enough to help Spiritism and the spirits on high with the explanations of the supernatural. And that is because Spiritism, among other things, helps us understand how the spiritual element acts on the material element, how that mechanism works. Because without the spiritual element enlivening, making the material element live, animalizing it, so to speak, that it moves, there would not be, matter is inert. Matter doesn't do anything. There would be no explanation there. So, dear friends, if you have any questions, if you like to say something or add something, I would so appreciate it. And if you don't want to do it or can't do it right now, please put it in the comments so we can talk about it and we can give you answers. And let me see. There is Luke. Hello, dear friends. Victoria. Thank you so much for joining. Lisa Tallies. Yes, dear friends. So nice to have you all here. Yeah, so I trust that you will leave comments. And in the meantime, we will be closing our study group tonight. I think we've put down a few foundation stones so we can build up on that next week. So God willing, we'll be here next week, same time, same place. And the chapter that we will be discussing, in case you wanted to pre-read it or prepare yourself, is entitled Spiritism Does Not Perform Miracles. Wow, we can't wait to learn more. Spiritism does not perform miracles. Dear friends, let us close with a prayer. We've been very much in our heads, so let us now drop into our hearts for balance. And let us say hello to our beloved Jesus, our guide and model. And let us also connect with God. God, the first cause, our creator, first cause of all things. Let us see, let us find some music here. And if you can, please close your eyes. Close your eyes and feel your feet on the ground and your hearts open. Let's take a deep breath because this was a lot of information. Dear God, dear Jesus, thank you so much for allowing us to get together tonight and open our minds to new concepts, to new understandings that thanks to Alan Kardec and his immense discipline and knowledge, intelligence, he was able to gift us with this immortal gem called Spiritism, which helps us to understand the universe, the laws, both scientific, God's scientific laws, as well as God's moral laws, helping us every single day to align ourselves more with the love, the wisdom, the guidance, the mercy. We thank you, God, for loving us as much as you do, and we are very dedicated to following your laws, proving that we love you too, that we respect you, that we know that without you we would not be. We're excited to understand the miracles better. For so many centuries, we just didn't know. And we're grateful that both science and Spiritism help us to understand the principles, the mechanisms, so as to follow in our daily practice those principles of understanding and love better. As we move forward, we extend our love and care just as you do to us, to our brothers and sisters as well. We know that on this planet, there are so many of us who are suffering, so many of us who are in need of consolation. And we vow we will support, we will work alongside with you to support our brothers and sisters as best as we can. And we also pray for all those who are in power, who are famous, wealthy, beautiful, knowledgeable, intelligent, that they may remember you as well, you and your guidance, love, and mercy, your justice. We know that the more of us align ourselves with you, dear God, with the help of Jesus, our guide and model, the more perfect we will become, the more godlike this planet will become. And so we humbly ask for permission to close tonight's study with so much gratitude in our hearts. And so be it. Thank you, dear friends. Thank you for joining. Sending you all much love. And so, God willing, we will see you again next week, same time. God bless you.